Good Friday morning, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for July the 21st. Today we are reading together in 1 Samuel in chapters 10 and 11, which is going to continue on with Samuel's interaction with Saul, who is soon to be the king of Israel. We are introduced to Saul in chapter 9, and he just again, to me, as I'm considering Saul, there's just nothing very special about him. He just seems to be a regular guy, except for the fact that he's kind of tall. And yet we're going to see as we go throughout chapters 10 and 11 that we begin to see a transformation in him, that we see some weaknesses of his, but also we see that whenever he succeeds, it's because of a very specific thing. And we're going to take note of that as we go throughout these two chapters here in chapters 10 and 11. So let me get the text up on the screen for us. We'll read along together here. In 1 Samuel chapters 10 and 11, Israel wanted a king. Chapter 9, we're introduced to this future king, Saul, and now we're going to see Samuel anoint him as this king of Israel. Beginning reading here in 1 Samuel chapter 10 and verse number 1. 1 Samuel chapter 10, verse number 1. Samuel took the flask of oil, poured it out on Saul's head, kissed him, and said, "Hasn't Yahweh anointed you ruler over his inheritance? Today, when you leave me, you'll find two men at Rachel's grave at Zelzah in the territory of Benjamin. They will say to you, 'The donkeys you were looking for have been found.' And now your father has stopped being concerned about the donkeys and is worried about you, asking, 'What should I do about my son?' You will proceed from there until you come to the oak of Tabor. 3 men going up to God at Bethel will meet you there, one bringing 3 goats, one bringing 3 loaves of bread, and one bringing a clay jar of wine. They will ask how you are and give you 2 loaves of bread, which you will accept from them. After that, you will come to Gibeah of God, where there are Philistine garrisons. When you arrive at this city, you will meet a group of prophets coming down from the high place prophesying. They will be preceded by harps, tambourines, flutes, and lyres. The Spirit of Yahweh will come powerfully on you, and you will prophesy with them, and you will be transformed. When these signs have happened to you, do whatever your circumstances require, because God is with you. Afterward, go ahead of me to Gilgal. I will come to you to offer burnt offerings and to sacrifice fellowship offerings. Wait 7 days until I come to you and show you what to do." When Saul turned to leave Samuel, God changed his heart, and all the signs came about that day. When Saul and his servant arrived at Gibeah, a group of prophets ran to him. Then the Spirit of God came powerfully on him, and he prophesied along with them. Everyone who knew him and saw him prophesy with the prophets asked each other, "What has happened to the son of Kish? Is Saul also among the prophets?" Then a man who was from there asked, "And who is their father?" As a result, "Is Saul also among the prophets?" became a popular saying. Then Saul finished prophesying and went to the high place. Saul's uncle asked him and his servant, "Where did you go?" "Well, to look for donkeys," Saul answered. "When we saw they weren't there, we went to Samuel." "Well, tell me," Saul's uncle asked, "who or what did Samuel say to you?" Saul told him, "He assured us that the donkeys had been found." However, Saul did not tell him about what Samuel had said about the matter of kingship. Samuel summoned the people to Yahweh at Mizpah and said to the Israelites, "This is what Yahweh, the God of Israel, says. I brought Israel out of Egypt, and I rescued you from the power of the Egyptians and all the kingdoms that were oppressing you. But today you have rejected your God, who saves you from all your troubles and afflictions. You said to him, 'You must set a king over us.' Now therefore, present yourselves before Yahweh by tribes and clans." Samuel had all the tribes of Israel come forward, and the tribe of Benjamin was selected. Then he had the tribe of Benjamin come forward by its clans, and the Matrite clan was selected. Finally, Saul, son of Kish, was selected. But when they searched for him, they could not find him. They again inquired of Yahweh, "Has the man come here yet?" Yahweh replied, "There he is, hidden among the supplies." They ran and got him from there, And when he stood among the people, he stood a head taller than anyone else. Samuel said to the people, "Do you see the one Yahweh has chosen? There is no one like him among the entire population." And all the people shouted, "Long live the king." Samuel proclaimed to the people the rights of kingship. He wrote them on a scroll, which he placed in the presence of Yahweh. Then Samuel sent all the people home. Saul also went to his home in Gibeah, and brave men whose hearts God had touched went with him. But some wicked men said, "How could this guy save us?" They despised him and did not bring him a gift. But Saul said nothing. Verse number 1 of chapter 11. Actually, I should note this, that there is a translation variant here. At the end of verse 27, the Dead Sea Scrolls add that Nahash, king of the Ammonites, had been severely oppressing the Gadites and Reubenites. He gouged out the right eye of each of them and brought fear and trembling on Israel. Of the Israelites beyond the Jordan, none remained whose right eye Nahash, king of the Ammonites, had not gouged out. But there were 7,000 men who had escaped from the Ammonites and had entered Jabesh Gilead. So with that as background from the Dead Sea Scrolls, we now proceed into chapter 11, which basically gives us that detail again, that Nahash, the Ammonites, came up and laid siege to Jabesh Gilead. That's this, again, that Dead Sea Scroll portion tells us why he goes here specifically. All the men of Jabesh said to him, "Make a treaty with us, and we will serve you." Nahash the Ammonite replied, "I'll make one with you on this one condition, that I gouge out everyone's right eye and humiliate all Israel." "Don't do anything to us for 7 days," the elders of Jabesh said to him, "and let us send messengers throughout the territory of Israel. If no one saves us, we will surrender to you." When the messengers came to Gibeah, Saul's hometown, and told the terms to the people, all wept aloud. Just then, Saul was coming in from the field behind his oxen. "What's the matter with the people? Why are they weeping?" Saul inquired. And they repeated to him the words of the men from Jabesh. When Saul heard these words, the Spirit of God suddenly came powerfully on him, and his anger burned furiously. He took a team of oxen, cut them in pieces, and sent them throughout the territory of Israel by messengers who said, "This is what will be done to the ox of anyone who doesn't march behind Saul and Samuel." As a result, the terror of Yahweh fell on the people, and they went out united. Saul counted them at Bezek. There were 300,000 Israelites and 30,000 men from Judah. He told the messengers who had come, "Tell this to the men of Jabesh Gilead. Deliverance will be yours tomorrow by the time the sun is hot." So the messengers told the men of Jabesh, and they rejoiced. Then the men of Jabesh said to Nahash, "Tomorrow we will come out, and you can do whatever you want to us." The next day, Saul organized the troops into 3 divisions. During the morning watch, they invaded the Ammonite camp and slaughtered them until the heat of the day. There were survivors, but they were so scattered that no 2 of them were left together. Afterward, the people said to Samuel, "Who said that Saul should not reign over us? Give us those men so we could kill them." But Saul ordered, "No one will be executed this day, for today Yahweh has provided deliverance in Israel." Then Samuel said to the people, "Come, let's go to Gilgal so we can renew the kingship there. So the people went to Gilgal, and there in Yahweh's presence they made Saul king. There they sacrificed fellowship offerings in Yahweh's presence, and Saul and all the people of Israel rejoiced greatly. And that is 1 Samuel chapters 10 and 11. Really, we have here the first real action that Saul engages in as a leadership figure within Israel. But before we get there, we're looking at chapter 10, the first part again. We see Samuel anointing Saul here in this moment, recognizing him as the divinely identified figure who is going to be the first, king of Israel. Now, again, there's a variant again, just depending on manuscripts from this time, the Septuagint, in verse number 1, at the end of verse number 1, where the Septuagint adds, and you will reign over Yahweh's people, and you will save them from their enemies all around. And this is the sign to you that Yahweh has anointed you ruler over his inheritance. So we're told why. And that goes back to what we see in chapter 9 and verses 16 and 17, that Yahweh has heard the cries of his people, and he is going to give this king who is going to give you deliverance over your enemies. And he tells him, he basically confirms all this by giving him a number of foretellings, that you're going to run into this people here and that people there, and so on and so forth. We have that from verses 2 all the way through the end of verse number 8. There are some Samson echoes that are mentioned here, about the spirit of Yahweh coming powerfully on him. That's prophesied, that's foretold in, or foretold. I'm actually sure which one it is. I think it's foretold in verse number 6. And it happens in verse number 9, where the spirit does come upon him and he begins to prophesy in that moment. But before that, verse number 9 as well talks about God changed his heart. And I'm very curious about that. How? What part of God's heart or what part of Samuel's heart did God change? I'm not sure I have a really good answer for that. I don't think it could be that he's not very that he's not more decisive or courageous, because in fact, I mean, we're going to see later on, whenever he is selected, he's hiding. That's showing some fear and timidity. He's scared here in this moment. I think he shows a little bit more timidity at the end of the chapter, when he doesn't say anything to these people who are going to who are speaking poor of him. He doesn't share all the way what Samuel told him about kingship whenever his uncle asked the question. So I'm not really sure about what it is that changed. Maybe that his heart was changed, softened to embrace God more. I'm not really sure. I don't have a great answer. Maybe you do. Please feel free to leave that in the comment section below if you have some thoughts on that. But as he begins prophesying now, after all these things take place, and again, we're not given the detail of them actually being fulfilled. It just tells us in verse number 9 that all the signs came about that day, just as Samuel had said, showing that God was with him and that God was certainly involved in this process. Maybe the most involved being that he came upon Saul. But Saul's prophesying, and these people are shocked. What happened to the son of Kish? Is Saul also among the prophets? It seems that Saul was not exactly the type of guy that people expected to prophesy. Again, that makes me wonder about the exact way that he was viewed by other people, and the way that we should view him in this earliest part of the story. Who is their father? Who's behind this whole thing? Is this Yahweh at work in these prophets and in Saul? Well, that certainly is the case. We know, reading from our perspective, that he finishes prophesying, he goes up to the high place, and again, he has this conversation with his uncle about what exactly took place. He just says, oh, we just went to look for some donkeys, and they end up finding their way back home. After this, Samuel calls the people to himself, calls them to Mizpah, and he talks about how they have rejected Yahweh. Even though he's been good to you, you have rejected your God who saves you from your troubles and afflictions. You've demanded of him. And I think that's the key here, is that making demands of God. They are pushing the envelope. They're trying to tell God on whose terms they're going to have a king, and it's theirs. So in that way, they have rejected Yahweh. You must set a king over us. So fine, let's present him. And again, we know, if we know the story of Saul, we know that he ends up being the exact type of king they deserved. Not that they wanted, but they deserved, for the type of people that they were. So they go through this process of casting lots. Again, this is something that Scripture shows us, that whenever it happened in the context of Scripture, it was something that God guided. So it ended up, not just coincidentally, but because of divine intervention, falls on Saul. And they search for him, but they can't find him. They again inquire of Yahweh, has the man come here yet? And it takes Yahweh saying he's hiding there among the supplies. Y'all can't find the king without me, I think, is the point that Yahweh is really getting at here within this particular section. It's everything that you're going to do, everything's going to happen is because of me. God is the one who changes hearts. God is the one who allows people to prophesy. God is the one that caused all these foretellings to come true. He is the one who gives them the king. He's the one whose spirit comes upon him and enables him to do these things. It's all about God. And that, again, that's really the emphasis I want us to have within these chapters, is what is God doing? What degree of involvement do we see Yahweh having within the story? And it's a great deal. He's the one that's really moving this along. It's not about Saul. It's not about Samuel primarily. It's about God. What is God doing? God is the one giving the king. So they get him, and as he stands up, he just keeps standing up, and he's way bigger than everybody else. Samuel's like, God, you got to see this. This is the great king that God has given you. This is the one that Yahweh has chosen. Colored that real fast, missed that part. And there's no one like him among the entire population. Now people shouted, long live the king. He goes through the process of talking about the king's rights. And eventually everybody goes home. Saul goes home. Some who are loyal to him, that again, God touched their heart, they go with him as well. And yet there's these wicked men saying, nah, do we really think this guy can do it? Do we really think so? Yeah, Saul lets it go. Maybe that's humility. Maybe that's timidity. I'm not exactly sure. Again, that's open for interpretation, I think. In chapter 11, or again, at the end of chapter 10, we have this note from the Dead Sea Scrolls, which adds some more detail about what Nahash is doing within Israel, just terrorizing Israel on the far side of the Jordan River, on the eastern side of the Jordan River. And if that is accurate to history, if that's actually something that happened, then what we have in Jabesh Gilead are people who have ran from Nahash to this place, and Nahash has laid siege in order to get these individuals. Now we need to start recognizing a ton of connections within chapter 11 to chapters 19, 20, and 21 of the Judges story. Because remember, we're introduced there to that terrible Levite who mistreats his concubine, allows her to be raped, ends up cutting her up, sends her out, and says the people of Gibeah, Saul's hometown, did this horrible thing. Israel needs to come. You need to come get them. They come, almost wipe out Benjamin completely. Then they have the whole thing of having to find wives for Benjamin. Where do they come from? They come from Jabesh Gilead. So there's a lot of interplay that's going on here that is connecting back from what is seen in Judges chapters 19, 20, and 21. So Nahash comes upon Jabesh Gilead. He lays siege to them, and they just roll over. They're a bunch of weaklings. They have no backbone, no courage whatsoever. They roll over and they say, let's make a treaty. And he says, fine, we'll do that after I gouge out your right eyes, which basically makes them basically incapable of fighting and resisting. And they say, well, before you do that, let's see if anybody wants to save us, trying to buy as much time as they can. They send messengers to Gibeah, which is again Benjamin, and they tell them what happened. And everybody's freaking out. They're weeping aloud. Saul comes in at that time, says, what's going on? They tell him what happened. And when Saul hears the story, again, the Spirit of Yahweh suddenly comes powerfully on him. And this is the turning point of chapter 11. This is the real turning point. There's a real great chiastic structure to chapter 11, and it all hinges here on verse number 6. Because at this point, the Spirit comes on him. Saul gets angry, and he... I don't know if it was in Saul's, if this was what was going on in Saul's mind, or if this was just the reality. If any pagan had been against an Israelite city, I don't know if he's thinking, oh, that's Jabesh Gilead. We kind of owe them our lives. As a Benjamin, I owe them for my existence, basically. So I better defend them. I don't know if that's going on or not, but we know that intertextually, considering that story that we have here, him again, doing more from that particular context, cutting up these oxen, just like that Levite did, sending them out and using that as the rallying cry that if you don't help Saul and Samuel, then you're going to get it. But notice again, at the end of verse number 7, it is the terror of Yahweh that fell on people, and they went out united. This divided people becomes united. But why? Because of Samuel and Saul primarily? No. Because of Yahweh. Yahweh came upon Saul. He came powerfully upon him. It is the terror of Yahweh that fell on the people. And that's the real rallying cry behind all of this. So verses 8 through 10, he's getting them ready for battle. He tells the people of Jabesh, tell Nahash we'll be there tomorrow. So the next day, Saul organizes the troops. They ambush the Ammonites in their camp. Big, strong victory for the people. They don't even make it to lunchtime. They're able to have that victory. And after this great victory, verse number 12, the people said to Samuel, well, who was it that said that Samuel shouldn't reign over us? Who are these wicked men from chapter 10 and verse number 27? Let's see them, because we're going to kill them, because they're obviously idiots. This guy, he's the best thing ever. He's the best thing since sliced bread. Look at this great victory he just led us to. He united this very divided people to have this great victory. But Saul, to his credit, says, no. Today's not about us dying. No, today's about us being delivered. And I appreciate this about Saul. It is Yahweh who provided deliverance for Israel. That is a great point there. I think this seems to be a part of Yahweh changing Saul's heart right here in this moment. He's got his head on straight. He's thinking the right way. His perspective is the way it ought to be. This was not about me. This is not about y'all. This is about Yahweh. He is the one that made that happen. So Samuel responds to this. Come on, let's all go to Gilgal. Let's renew the kingship there. Renew the kingship. I thought this was the first king. It is the first king. So I think what we're talking about here is renewing Yahweh's kingship. We are renewing the reality that Yahweh is our king and that Saul is going to be the one who is going to be his representative as the earthly king. Yahweh's the real king, but Saul here is the earthly king through whom Yahweh is going to rule. They did all this in Yahweh's presence. They made Saul king. They sacrificed fellowship offerings in Yahweh's presence, and there was great rejoicing. It goes from being great fear, great discouragement, to being great rejoicing. Why? Because of Saul? No. Because of Samuel? No. Because the people? No. But because of Yahweh and the way he was involved in this story. So long as that's the case, so long as the people are relying upon God to do what God does, things are going to go well. But we're going to see not too long in the future that Saul's going to fail to do that. He's not going to do that. He's going to take things into his own hands. And when that happens, bad things certainly result from it. Bad things certainly follow. So tomorrow we'll read chapters 12 and 13 together, which is going to be Samuel's final speech and also a failure of Saul that shows up here within the story. Saul not waiting like he needed to wait. Hope you'll tune in for that reading tomorrow. If you have any questions or comments about this text here in chapters 10 and 11, please feel free to leave that in the comment section below. And hope to see you again tomorrow for this reading. Actually, look forward to seeing everybody tonight as we conclude our series of lessons with Jim Jonas. It's been great to have him and Melanie with us. We've really enjoyed it, and we're looking forward to a great finish tonight. Again, thanks for tuning in today. Have a great rest of your Friday, everyone. Take care. God bless.